Hello, this is Peter Rawlins, and I'm going to give a lesson geared to AP World History, designed for Chinese Senior 3 students or American Grade 12. And it builds then on previous work that I hope as a student you've done then on the medieval era and the early modern era, and your previous pre-AP work in grade 11 on the origins of the Industrial Revolution. So a little bit of revision, but also going into this in a bit more depth. So let's start off getting you to write down the heading on the Industrial Revolution. We're going to be using as our recommended AP World History textbook the book by R.W. Bulliet, The Earth and Its Peoples, and it's the section Chapter 23, pages 606 to 618. So I'm going to start off then getting you to write down our basic fundamental concepts: capital, labour, of course I'm going to spell the British way, and technology. I'm going to start comparing the dictionary definitions and or your definitions from your economics textbooks on capital, labour and technology with the historical reality of the first industrialisation process in Britain in the late 18th, early 19th century. First of all, though, I want you to get to write down then our objectives. So what we must do, we're going to note how Britain industrialised. Then we should then hopefully understand the causes of industrialisation. Why Britain? Why there and not somewhere like China or whatever? And then hopefully you should be able, we hope, to evaluate and judge its significance for the world as a whole. Well, let's see how many of those objectives we can start to deal with in our mini lesson. So first of all, we can sort of pause here and give you then 5 minutes just to use your dictionary. If you've got a translation dictionary, by all means use your own original language, although we shall preferably use English, and define what you understand according to your dictionary or your economics textbooks as capital, labour and technology. Okay, so I can give the student here about 5 or so minutes to write out their definitions, to write out the objectives of what the lesson happens to be. So let's resume after they've written out the objectives. Okay, so you should then from your dictionary and or your economics textbook have got a definition of capital as being essentially start-up money that starts a business. But what I'm going to do here is show you how it's more than just start-up money. That capital cannot really be understood in the late 18th, 19th century or even now, except as a social relationship. A social relationship between those who own capital and those who labour for them. So labour in this case is not just an abstraction, work in general, but it is labourers and special types of labourers and special types of labour. So we can't understand the Industrial Revolution of the late 18th century or any other subsequent industrialisations throughout the world unless we understand this social relationship between capital and labour. Because this is how the surplus is going to be generated in new ways. And this, of course, is fundamental for understanding economic history as we've seen before in our previous work. There's no such thing as a shortage. There's no such thing as scarcity. There's a surplus ever since the Neolithic Revolution. But the question is, how is that surplus generated and who gets it? And we'll start investigating also another concept you've probably seen in economics textbooks about technology and innovation. And what I'm going to show you is that the economics textbooks overemphasize technological innovation, and instead we're relying on fairly traditional means which are improved. But why are they improved? How are they improved? Okay, let's now start looking at some evidence. And in this case, we're going to use some visual evidence. It's the map on page 610 of our recommended textbook by Bulliet. And let's have a look at this in more detail. Here is the map on page 610 that shows you then the Industrial Revolution in Britain by about 1850. Now, the first phase of the Industrial Revolution starts with the so-called take-off, late 18th century, between 1760 and certainly by 1780, when people were already aware that something tremendous was happening. And really we can say up until the 1840s, around about 1848, something like that, with the railways. Now, what I want you to do then is to look at the map, look at the legend or key to the map, have a look at what the comment below says. And we're told here, let's read through it together. The Industrial Revolution in Britain about 1850. The first industries arose in northern and western England, principally northern England. We'll look at those in western, but principally northern England. These regions had abundant coal and iron ore deposits for the iron industry, as well as a moist climate and fast-flowing rivers, factors important for the cotton textile industry. Now, I'll come back to that and look at that, but let's first of all, I want you simply in your notebook then to describe what does the map show. First of all, I want you to describe what the map shows, and then we're going to work through what does the map show in terms of historical significance. Okay, so we can pause there, and I'm going to give you 5 minutes just to write down, describe what does the map show, and then jot some bullet points down. What conclusions can you draw from that? Okay, so again, we give the student about 5 or so minutes just to write down what the map shows. And let's then go into this in a bit more detail. So, we can see the feedback from the student. Clearly, we can see the importance of industrial areas, and we note they're all based on coal. So already as we come back to looking at our objective, the basic simple objective, we're going to see then that how did Britain industrialise? Well, it clearly industrialised on the basis of coal fields. Now, let's look though a little bit further into this, because it also shows, you can see there, in light purple, centres of woolen cloth production. Now, again, I've got the student here, you can look up the word textile, because you'll see textile includes both woolen cloth, which goes back to the Middle Ages, as we've seen before, linked to what is now the Low Countries, Belgium and Italian finance, and also cotton. Now let's have a look at where the original centres here of medieval early modern production are. They're in the West Country, around Bristol, Bath there, and in Norwich. And in the Middle Ages, Norwich was the second city of medieval England after London. Note how big London is as the capital and the port city. Now, I'll ask you a question about Bristol. Bristol, as we've already seen, was the centre of which type of trade in the late 17th, early 18th century? Bristol and Liverpool. Yep, hopefully then the student will be able to say slave trade. Okay. Norwich, you will note there, is in the agricultural areas of eastern England. And we've already seen from our work then on the English Civil War that the areas of capitalist agriculture, where the land was used to make a profit, are based in eastern and southeastern England. So we've already got wool as a textile. And then we can see as we move up towards the north of England, there we'll see Lancashire, Liverpool, Manchester, the world's first industrial city on the River Irwell, and then over the Pennine Mountains, or hills, into the Yorkshire towns of Bradford, Leeds and Sheffield. It's in the north, and clearly already we can see how is it industrialising on coal. Okay, now a question, and I'm going to ask you here just to look at what it says below the map. It says important factors for the cotton textile industry. Manchester became a cotton town, but here on the map you can see wool. So the question is, where can they grow cotton? Because cotton is a tropical crop. Frosts, and England has lots of frost in the winter, frost will kill cotton. So where can they grow cotton if it's a tropical crop? Okay, and then hopefully we'll get the answer back. We'll go work, in the tropical colonies, notably the Caribbean and the southern colonies of British North America. And that generates another question. So if that's where cotton can be grown, not in England, but in the Caribbean and the southern colonies of British North America, who is going to grow it? Yep, that's it. Slaves. So we can't understand the Industrial Revolution of Britain unless we note who. As the famous Russian saying goes, "Kto kogo," who, whom. In this case, the slaves are producing the raw material, which is shipped into the slave ports of Bristol, but particularly Liverpool. You'll note the significance of Liverpool. And that is going to generate a profit. Now, so already we're noting certain basic things here. The link of Britain to its empire in the Americas and slave production that generates the raw cotton material. This is what is going to generate money and profit. Okay, so never mind the sugar, it's the cotton that matters. Okay, so let's have a scroll down. And we're going to look then at another visual piece of evidence. And I'm going to look here, as I get this a bit bigger, at a painting. In this case, it is an example of a painting then, if I can get this to the right size. Yeah, here we go. Pithead of a coal mine. Now, we've already seen then the significance of coal. How did Britain industrialise? On the basis of its coal industries and on the basis of slave labour producing the raw material cotton. Here we go. Pithead of a coal mine. A small coal mine in the centre of this picture sends a Newcomen engine. Again, I'm going to get you to look up Newcomen, not Boulton and Watt. We're not looking at James Watt's steam engine. We're looking at an earlier, already existing, rather leaky engine designed by Thomas Newcomen in the 1690s, well before the takeoff. So already we can start to begin to understand how Britain industrialised. Well, it's already got basic existing technology. Not an innovation, it's not Watts, it's Newcomen. And I want you, as a sort of mini homework, again, to describe what the picture shows. Because there's an idea here. The work of hauling coal out of the mine was still done by horses and mules, which we can see in the picture. So much for technological innovation. Okay, it's an old steam engine, and they're using horses and mules. The smoke coming out of the smokestack is a trademark of the early industrial era. So this is late 18th century we're looking at here. Now, I'm going to set you as a little sort of mini homework, a set of questions. Already we're starting to look at how Britain industrialised on the basis of coal power, on the basis of slave labour, on the basis of a colonial empire that generates the supply. And then we're going to think about the demand later on when we look at who's going to buy cotton cloth. Already we're starting to see some sort of idea here. Right, now as a set of questions for our sort of little mini homework before we go into note making on the textbook is, again, start off, what does the picture show? And I want you in particular to think about, where is this? We're not told the region, but we can clearly see whether it's town or country. Now, on the basis of whether it's town or country, what sort of labourers are required? What type of labourers? Always think of capital and labour in social terms. Don't think of them in mathematical terms or supply and demand curves. We're talking about real human beings. Okay, so what sort of labour is required? Okay, and then we've got, what does the picture show about technology? Okay, so I'm going to leave you with those questions. What does the picture show? Just describe it, particularly whether it's town or country. What does that tell you? What does it show in the deeper sense about technology or technological innovation? And in particular, what type of labour is required for this particular industry? Okay, well, I'll pause there at our mini lesson and our mini homework, and then afterwards we can go through the significance of what the picture shows, and then go into doing some note making on the first phase of the Industrial Revolution from 1780s, 60s, 1780s up until the middle of the 19th century. Okay, let's pause there.